The night vision camera blinks to life at 2:47:13 a.m. on September 8th, its infrared sensors cutting through the darkness like a digital scalpel. Warehouse B-17, positioned strategically on the dusty outskirts of Culiacan, Mexico, stands as a monument to Los Reyes Cartel's unprecedented power and wealth. This isn't just any storage facility. It's the beating heart of a multi-billion-dollar cocaine empire, home to the cartel's most precious commodity, $5 million worth of pure Colombian cocaine. Marco Delgado adjusts his radio headset with practiced precision, the gesture of a man who has performed this routine thousands of times before. He continues his methodical patrol under the flickering LEDs, his movements betraying the disciplined bearing of someone with extensive military training. What makes this night different isn't visible to the cameras. It's the knowledge that within the next 46 minutes, Marco will have loaded 6 duffel bags containing bivouac-grade cocaine into a specially modified camouflage pickup truck. What the security footage cannot reveal is the staggering scope of Marco's preparation. For 3 years, he has systematically infiltrated cartel operations, mapping every weakness, documenting every vulnerability, and identifying every moment when the organization's guard would be down. He has studied shift schedules, memorized access codes, and cultivated relationships with key personnel, all while maintaining the facade of a loyal employee. By dawn on September 9th, cartel bosses, federal agents, DEA operatives, and Interpol investigators would all be chasing a ghost who had vanished with enough cocaine to supply major cities for months. The theft would trigger a cascade of violence across Mexico, spark international investigations, and create a legend that would inspire criminals and terrify law enforcement for years to come. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Marco Delgado's transformation from decorated war hero to master criminal represents one of the most complex character studies in modern criminal history. His journey didn't begin in the shadows of organized crime. It started in the honor-bound traditions of Mexico's military elite, where he distinguished himself as a soldier of exceptional capability and unwavering dedication. Born in 1985 in the mountain village of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, ironically the same region that would later become the epicenter of Mexico's most powerful drug cartels, Marco grew up in a family steeped in military tradition. His father, Sergeant Major Carlos Delgado, served with distinction in the Mexican Army's Anti-Narcotics Division, while his grandfather had fought alongside revolutionary forces in the early 20th century. Marco's military career began in 2003 when he enlisted in the Mexican Army's elite Special Forces unit, the Fuerzas Especiales. His natural aptitude for tactical operations, combined with an almost supernatural ability to remain undetected in hostile environments, quickly set him apart from his peers. During advanced training exercises, Marco consistently outperformed soldiers with years more experience, demonstrating an instinctive understanding of reconnaissance, surveillance, and infiltration techniques. His first major deployment came in 2008 during Operation Conjunto Michoacán, a massive federal initiative designed to break the power of the La Familia cartel. Marco's unit was tasked with conducting deep reconnaissance missions in areas where cartel presence was suspected but not confirmed. Operating alone or in 2-man teams, Marco would spend days in hostile territory, gathering intelligence that would prove crucial to subsequent military operations. It was during these operations that Marco earned his legendary nickname, El Halcon, the Hawk. The designation came after a particularly challenging mission in the mountains of Michoacán, where Marco had been tasked with locating a hidden laboratory complex that intelligence suggested was producing methamphetamine on an industrial scale. After 3 days of careful observation, Marco not only located the facility, but also identified the movement patterns of its security personnel, documented the locations of defensive positions, and even counted the number of weapons stored on site. The intelligence Marco provided enabled his unit to execute a perfect raid that resulted in the seizure of over 2 tons of methamphetamine, the arrest of 37 cartel members, and the destruction of equipment worth millions of dollars. Most remarkably, the operation was completed without a single casualty on either side, a testament to the accuracy and completeness of Marco's reconnaissance work. His service record from 2008 to 2015 reads like a catalog of military excellence. Marco participated in over 40 major operations against various criminal organizations, consistently providing intelligence that proved both accurate and actionable. He was awarded the Medal of Military Merit 3 times, received commendations for valor from both Mexican and American military officials, and was selected for advanced training programs that few soldiers ever experience. The turning point in Marco's military career came during Operation Tormenta Verde in 2014, a joint operation targeting a major heroin trafficking network operating along the Guatemala border. Marco's unit had been conducting surveillance on a suspected distribution center when they were ambushed by a heavily armed cartel force. Pinned down in an abandoned village with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of reinforcement, the unit faced potential annihilation. Marco's response demonstrated the tactical brilliance that would later make him such a formidable criminal. Using only night vision optics and a standard-issue sniper rifle, he methodically eliminated 4 cartel sentries from a distance of over 800 meters. Each shot was perfectly placed, instantly neutralizing targets without alerting other cartel members to the sniper's position. The precision of his marksmanship created enough confusion among the cartel forces to allow Marco's unit to reposition and ultimately break the ambush. The operation's success led to the capture of over 100 kilograms of heroin, the arrest of 23 cartel members, and the seizure of a significant weapons cache. Marco's commanding officer, Colonel Ramirez, described his actions as exemplary courage in the face of overwhelming odds and recommended him for Mexico's highest military honor. However, Marco's military service also exposed him to the pervasive corruption that plagued Mexico's anti-drug efforts. He witnessed evidence disappearing from lockups, captured cartel members being released without trial, and military equipment being sold to the same organizations his unit was supposed to be fighting. The corruption wasn't limited to individual bad actors. It represented a systemic failure that extended from local police departments to federal agencies. The final betrayal came in 2015 when Colonel Ramirez, the same officer who had praised Marco's heroism, was arrested for selling confiscated weapons back to the cartels. The investigation revealed that Ramirez had been providing operational intelligence to criminal organizations, compromising missions, and endangering the lives of soldiers under his command. Several operations that Marco had participated in had been leaked to cartel forces, explaining why some missions had encountered unexpected resistance. Marco's disillusionment was complete. He had spent years risking his life to fight organizations that his own superiors were secretly supporting. The idealistic young soldier who had enlisted to serve his country had been transformed into a cynical veteran who understood that the war on drugs was fundamentally corrupted by the very people who were supposed to be leading it. When Marco left the military in 2015, he carried with him not just years of tactical training and operational experience, but also a deep understanding of how criminal organizations operated, how law enforcement agencies functioned, and most importantly, how the two systems intersected in ways that created opportunities for those clever enough to exploit them. Marco's transition from military service to civilian life proved more challenging than he had anticipated. The skills that had made him invaluable in combat operations, surveillance, infiltration, tactical analysis, had limited applications in the legitimate job market. His wife, Maria, was battling cancer, and the mounting medical bills created financial pressures that his military pension couldn't address. He spent 2 years working private security for wealthy businessmen in Guadalajara, protecting executives whose companies operated in Mexico's increasingly dangerous commercial environment. The work was steady but uninspiring, consisting mainly of driving armored vehicles, checking security systems, and standing guard at corporate events. Marco's advanced tactical skills were largely wasted on routine protection duties that any competent security guard could have handled. The financial pressures intensified when Maria's cancer treatment required experimental procedures not covered by government health insurance. Marco found himself facing medical bills that exceeded his annual salary, with no realistic prospect of earning the money through legitimate employment. It was during this period of desperation that he first began considering alternatives to conventional work. The cartel's recruitment approach was sophisticated and psychologically astute. Rather than making a crude offer of employment, they positioned the opportunity as a chance for Marco to use his military skills in service of Mexican business interests. The recruiters, led by a former military intelligence officer named Captain Vega, presented Los Reyes Cartel as a legitimate business organization that needed security consultation from someone with Marco's background. Their pitch was carefully crafted to appeal to Marco's sense of professionalism and patriotism. They weren't asking him to become a sicario or participate in violence. They needed someone with his tactical expertise to assess vulnerabilities in their operations and recommend improvements to their security protocols. The work would be challenging, intellectually stimulating, and financially rewarding. More importantly, they offered Marco something that legitimate employment couldn't provide: respect for his military service and recognition of his professional capabilities. While civilian employers saw him as an overqualified security guard, the cartel recruiters understood that they were dealing with one of Mexico's most skilled reconnaissance specialists. The financial offer was impossible to ignore. Los Reyes Cartel proposed paying Marco 3 times his military salary, with full medical coverage for his family and performance bonuses that could significantly increase his income. For a man facing bankruptcy due to medical bills, the offer represented not just employment, but salvation. Marco accepted the position in early 2018, telling himself that he was simply providing security services to a business organization. He wouldn't touch drugs, wouldn't participate in violence, and wouldn't compromise his personal ethical standards. It was a comfortable rationalization that allowed him to accept the job without acknowledging its true nature. The illusion lasted exactly 48 hours. Marco's first assignment was to conduct a security assessment of a warehouse facility that he was told contained agricultural products. When he arrived at the location, he immediately recognized the facility's true purpose. It was a major cocaine processing and distribution center, complete with laboratories, packaging equipment, and storage areas containing millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs. The realization forced Marco to confront the reality of his situation. He wasn't working for a legitimate business organization. He was employed by one of Mexico's most powerful criminal enterprises. However, by this point, he had already accepted money from the cartel and had been introduced to operational details that made him a security risk if he attempted to leave. Marco made a pragmatic decision that would define the rest of his criminal career. If he was going to work for a criminal organization, he would approach the job with the same professionalism and dedication that had characterized his military service. He would excel at his assigned tasks, build relationships with key personnel, and gradually position himself for opportunities that might prove financially rewarding. Los Reyes Cartel's primary distribution hub represented the pinnacle of criminal engineering, a facility that combined military-grade security with industrial-scale drug processing capabilities. Warehouse B-17 occupied 47 acres of carefully selected desert terrain, positioned to provide optimal security while maintaining access to major transportation routes. The facility's location had been chosen with the precision of a military strategist. Situated 15 kilometers from the nearest populated area, the warehouse was isolated enough to prevent casual observation while remaining accessible to the heavy truck traffic that carried cocaine shipments to distribution points throughout North America. The surrounding desert provided natural barriers that would make unauthorized approach extremely difficult, while the facility's elevated position offered commanding views of all potential access routes. The security perimeter consisted of 3 concentric defensive rings, each designed to address different categories of threats. The outer fence stretched 12 feet high and extended along the entire perimeter, topped with coiled razor wire that would deter casual intruders. Motion sensors positioned every 30 meters could detect movement as small as a rabbit, while seismic detectors buried along the fence line would register any attempt to dig under the barrier. Guard towers positioned at each corner of the outer perimeter housed thermal imaging cameras capable of detecting human body heat from distances exceeding 2 kilometers. The cameras operated continuously, automatically tracking any movement within their range and alerting security personnel to potential threats. During Marco's tenure, the system had identified hikers, hunters, and even military patrols long before they came close enough to observe the facility's operations. The middle perimeter incorporated underground pressure sensors that could distinguish between different types of movement. Vehicle traffic registered differently than pedestrian activity, allowing security personnel to identify the nature of approaching threats. The system was sophisticated enough to differentiate between authorized personnel and potential intruders based on movement patterns and timing. The inner fence represented the facility's final defensive barrier, incorporating electrified mesh that delivered 50,000 volts to anyone attempting to climb over it. The electrical system was powered by independent generators that would continue operating even if the main power grid was compromised. Warning signs in multiple languages made the dangers clear, though the facility's remote location meant that unauthorized personnel rarely approached close enough to read them. Inside this fortress, the warehouse itself was a marvel of criminal logistics. The main building covered over 100,000 square feet, with loading docks capable of handling multiple tractor trailers simultaneously. The interior was divided into distinct zones, each optimized for different aspects of the cocaine distribution process. The storage area contained 60 climate-controlled containers, each one secured with biometric locks that required both fingerprint and retinal scans for access. The containers maintained precise temperature and humidity levels that prevented cocaine degradation, ensuring that product quality remained consistent throughout the distribution process. Each container could hold between 50 and 100 kilograms of cocaine, representing street values ranging from $5 to $10 million. The cocaine arrived in vacuum-sealed bricks that had been processed in Colombian laboratories using techniques that produced purity levels exceeding 97%. The bricks were packed in nitrogen-filled chambers that eliminated oxygen exposure, preventing chemical degradation that could reduce potency. Each brick was marked with codes that indicated its origin, processing date, and intended destination. The facility's administrative area contained offices where cartel logistics personnel coordinated shipments, managed inventory, and communicated with distribution networks throughout North America. The offices were equipped with encrypted communication systems that allowed secure coordination with other cartel facilities, while computer systems maintained detailed records of all transactions and movements. Marco's role as security liaison provided him with unprecedented access to every aspect of the facility's operations. He could monitor perimeter alerts, coordinate with patrol teams, and access security footage from any camera in the system. His security clearance allowed him to enter restricted areas, review confidential documents, and participate in planning meetings where operational details were discussed. The facility operated on a skeleton crew philosophy designed to minimize security risks. Management reasoned that fewer personnel meant fewer opportunities for security breaches, information leaks, or internal theft. Each shift was staffed by only 3 guards, rotating through 12-hour cycles that provided continuous coverage while limiting the number of people with detailed knowledge of operations. This approach created the exact vulnerability that Marco would eventually exploit. With minimal staffing and extensive automation, the facility was designed to operate efficiently, but not necessarily securely. The assumption was that external threats posed the greatest risk, while internal threats were minimal due to careful personnel screening and financial incentives for loyalty. Marco spent his first 6 months systematically mapping every aspect of the facility's operations. He documented guard schedules, memorized access codes, and identified the locations of every security device. More importantly, he began to understand the psychological dynamics that governed facility operations, recognizing which personnel were completely loyal and which might be vulnerable to manipulation. The breakthrough in his understanding came when he discovered that the night shift supervisor, Sergeant Rodriguez, had accumulated significant gambling debts that were causing him personal distress. Rodriguez frequently left his post to take bets over encrypted phone calls, creating windows of opportunity when security oversight was minimal. These absences, combined with Rodriguez's financial pressures, made him a potential weak point in the facility's security structure. Marco's approach to planning the heist demonstrated the same methodical thoroughness that had characterized his military career. He understood that a successful operation would require months of careful preparation, detailed intelligence gathering, and the development of multiple contingency plans. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a military-style operation that would require precision timing and flawless execution. The intelligence gathering phase began immediately after Marco's arrival at the facility. He approached his security duties with apparent enthusiasm, volunteering for additional assignments that would provide access to restricted areas and confidential information. His reputation as a dedicated employee gave him cover for activities that might otherwise have aroused suspicion. Marco's first priority was understanding the facility's operational rhythms. He documented the timing of deliveries, the patterns of personnel movement, and the periods when security oversight was minimal. He discovered that cocaine shipments typically arrived between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when traffic was minimal and the risk of observation was lowest. These early morning hours also coincided with the period when supervisory personnel were least likely to be present. The facility's record-keeping systems provided another source of valuable intelligence. Marco gained access to shipping manifests, inventory records, and financial documents that revealed the true scope of Los Reyes Cartel's operations. He learned that the facility processed over $500 million worth of cocaine annually, with individual shipments often worth tens of millions of dollars. More importantly, Marco discovered that the facility's security protocols had significant gaps. The automated systems were sophisticated but not infallible, and the minimal staffing meant that security coverage was inconsistent. He identified specific periods when surveillance was reduced, access controls were relaxed, and supervisory oversight was minimal. The most challenging aspect of Marco's preparation was eliminating potential witnesses without raising suspicion. He couldn't simply remove problematic personnel. Any sudden changes in staffing would prompt security reviews that might expose his activities. Instead, he needed to create situations where troublesome employees would be transferred or reassigned through apparently legitimate processes. His first target was Felipe Morales, a conscientious guard whose attention to detail made him a potential threat to Marco's plans. Felipe had a habit of conducting thorough security checks and asking probing questions about procedural irregularities. While these qualities made him a valuable employee, they also made him dangerous to Marco's operation. Marco began a subtle campaign to undermine Felipe's position. He planted evidence suggesting that Felipe had been stealing supplies, a few missing radios that had been hidden in Felipe's locker, ammunition that had been accidentally moved to the wrong storage location, and small equipment items that appeared to have been taken without authorization. The evidence was circumstantial but convincing, particularly when combined with Felipe's known financial difficulties. The campaign required careful timing and considerable psychological manipulation. Marco had to create the impression that Felipe was responsible for security lapses, while simultaneously positioning himself as the dedicated employee who had discovered the problems. He reported the missing equipment through official channels, expressing concern about security breaches and recommending increased vigilance. The strategy worked perfectly. Felipe was transferred to a different facility amid concerns about his reliability, and Marco volunteered to work double shifts to cover the staffing shortage. This gave him exclusive access to high-security areas during crucial overnight hours, when supervision was minimal and most management personnel were off-duty. Testing the facility's security weaknesses required even more careful planning. Marco couldn't simply probe systems randomly. Any unusual activity would be logged and potentially investigated. Instead, he began reporting minor equipment failures that would provide legitimate reasons for accessing security systems and testing their responses. The failures were subtle but strategically significant. Marco would report sensor malfunctions that had been caused by carefully placed debris, camera glitches that resulted from dust deliberately introduced into lens housings, and communication problems that had been created by temporarily disconnecting power supplies. Each incident allowed him to study the facility's response protocols while identifying additional vulnerabilities. The most important discovery came when Marco realized that the surveillance system had a critical vulnerability during power transitions. When the facility switched from main power to backup generators, the system would automatically loop the previous 30 minutes of footage while recording new data to a secondary drive. This created a window of invisibility that could be exploited if the timing was perfect. Marco spent weeks studying the power system's behavior, documenting the exact duration of the vulnerability window, and identifying the specific conditions that would trigger the backup sequence. He learned that the system was particularly sensitive to power fluctuations during storm conditions, when lightning strikes and electrical surges would cause temporary disruptions. The breakthrough came when Marco discovered that he could artificially trigger the power transition by introducing controlled electromagnetic pulses into the facility's electrical system. Using modified electronic equipment, he could create the appearance of storm-related power problems that would activate the surveillance loop without raising suspicion. September 8th began with weather conditions that seemed designed to facilitate Marco's plan. Meteorological reports indicated a severe tropical storm system moving across Sinaloa, with sustained winds exceeding 80 kilometers per hour and electrical activity that had already disrupted power grids throughout the region. The storm would provide natural cover for any technical malfunctions that might occur during Marco's operation. Marco arrived at the facility at 2:30 a.m., exactly on schedule for his regular shift. His appearance and demeanor gave no indication that this night would be different from any other. He carried the same equipment he always brought: radio, flashlight, security keys, and personal items. The only difference was a small electronic device hidden in his jacket pocket, a modified cell phone that could generate electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to disrupt the facility's electrical systems. The storm was intensifying as Marco checked in with the night supervisor, Sergeant Rodriguez. Lightning strikes were visible on the horizon, and radio communications were already experiencing intermittent blackouts due to atmospheric interference. Rodriguez, distracted by a high-stakes poker game being conducted over encrypted messaging, barely acknowledged Marco's arrival before returning to his gambling activities. Marco's first move was conducting a routine security check that would position him near the facility's main electrical panel. This provided cover for activating the electromagnetic pulse device, which he did at exactly 2:45 a.m. The pulse was carefully calibrated to simulate a lightning-induced power surge, triggering the facility's backup power sequence and activating the surveillance loop. The timing was crucial. Marco had calculated that the loop would provide approximately 28 minutes of invisible activity before new footage would begin recording. This window would need to accommodate his entire operation, from accessing the storage area to loading the cocaine and returning to his normal patrol duties. Disabling the perimeter alerts required the use of cloned access cards that Marco had created over several months. He had used specialized equipment to copy RFID signals from authorized personnel, creating duplicate cards that would register as legitimate access attempts. The cloning process had been time-consuming and technically challenging, but it allowed Marco to bypass security systems without triggering alarms. Each security layer required a different approach. The outer perimeter sensors were disabled using a portable device that generated false signals, creating the impression that the system was experiencing weather-related malfunctions. The middle perimeter pressure sensors were bypassed by following precise routes that Marco had mapped during his intelligence gathering phase. The inner fence's electrical system was temporarily disabled, using insulated tools that allowed him to create a safe passage. The most challenging obstacle was Container 7 Alpha's biometric security system. Marco had prepared for this moment by creating a silicone fingerprint overlay, using techniques he had learned during military intelligence training. The process had required obtaining a clear print from the authorized user, creating a mold using dental impression material, and producing a flexible overlay that could fool the scanner's sensors. The retinal scanner presented an even greater challenge. Marco had discovered that the system's calibration could be disrupted by introducing a small electromagnetic pulse directly into the scanner's optical components. The technique required precise timing and positioning, but when executed correctly, it would cause the scanner to default to backup authentication modes that were less secure. At 3:15 a.m., Marco successfully accessed Container 7 Alpha. The sight that greeted him would have overwhelmed most people. Row upon row of cocaine bricks, each one vacuum-sealed and marked with shipping codes, indicating Colombian origin and purity levels exceeding 97%. The container's contents represented more money than most people would see in multiple lifetimes. Marco's military training allowed him to remain focused despite the staggering value of the merchandise surrounding him. He had predetermined exactly which products to take, selecting bricks based on their markings and quality indicators. The 6 duffel bags he had prepared could hold approximately 60 kilograms of cocaine, representing a street value of roughly $5.3. The loading process required both speed and precision. Marco had practiced the movements repeatedly, ensuring that he could fill each bag efficiently while maintaining the appearance that nothing had been disturbed. He left the majority of the container's contents untouched, creating the impression that the theft had been discovered and interrupted before more damage could be done. Working with the mechanical efficiency of a trained soldier, Marco loaded each duffel bag to capacity. The cocaine bricks were surprisingly heavy, and the bags required careful handling to prevent tears or spills that might leave evidence. Each bag was sealed and marked with codes that would allow Marco to identify their contents during the distribution phase. The exact timestamp read 3:33 a.m. when Marco completed the loading process. 6 bags containing the highest quality cocaine in the facility now sat on a hydraulic service cart that he had positioned earlier in the evening. The entire operation had taken less than 20 minutes, executed with the precision and efficiency that characterized all of Marco's professional activities. Moving the cocaine to his prepared vehicle required navigating through the facility's interior, while avoiding areas covered by cameras not affected by the surveillance loop. Marco had mapped these routes during his intelligence gathering phase, identifying pathways that would allow him to transport the bags without appearing on any security footage. The vehicle itself was a modified pickup truck that had been specially prepared for the operation. Marco had removed the rear seat and installed hidden compartments that could accommodate the duffel bags while maintaining the truck's normal appearance. The modifications were professional grade, invisible to casual observation, and designed to pass inspection at police checkpoints. By 3:45 a.m., all 6 bags were secured in the vehicle's hidden compartments. Marco had completed the theft phase of his operation and was ready to begin the equally complex escape sequence. The storm was reaching its peak intensity, with lightning strikes occurring every few minutes and heavy rain reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. Marco's escape strategy demonstrated the same meticulous planning that had characterized his infiltration of the facility. Rather than fleeing immediately, he implemented a sophisticated diversion designed to misdirect investigative efforts for the crucial hours needed to implement his long-term disappearance plan. The burned-out service vehicle that would be discovered 3 miles from the facility had been prepared weeks in advance. Marco had purchased the truck using forged documents obtained through criminal contacts, then systematically removed all identifying marks, serial numbers, and forensic evidence that might trace back to him. The vehicle had been stored in a remote location until the night of the heist, when it was moved to a predetermined position along one of the facility's secondary access routes. The vehicle's destruction was carefully choreographed to create maximum confusion among investigators. Marco had planted evidence suggesting that the thieves had panicked after completing the theft, abandoned their carefully planned escape route, and fled on foot into the desert. The burned truck would reinforce this narrative while eliminating any forensic evidence that might have been left behind. More importantly, Marco had strategically placed evidence pointing to involvement by a rival cartel organization. Scattered around the burned vehicle were cigarette butts from a brand popular in Jalisco, ammunition casings from weapons commonly used by Nueva Generation cartel members, and a piece of fabric torn from a uniform worn by Jalisco sicarios. The evidence was subtle enough to appear authentic while being obvious enough to be discovered by investigators. The false flag operation was psychologically brilliant. Los Reyes Cartel leadership, already paranoid about territorial disputes and intercartel warfare, would immediately suspect that the theft was an act of aggression by their rivals. This would trigger a cycle of retaliation that would consume investigative resources and divert attention from the possibility that the theft had been an inside job. Marco's multiple drop point strategy ensured that even if one cache was discovered, he would retain access to the majority of his stolen goods. The system had been designed with redundancy in mind, providing multiple layers of security that would protect his assets even if part of the operation was compromised. The first safe house was located in a middle-class residential neighborhood in Culiacan, disguised as the home of a small business owner who traveled frequently for work. Marco had rented the property through intermediaries, using forged documents and cash payments that left no traceable connections to his real identity. The basement had been modified to include a concealed compartment behind a false wall where 2 duffel bags could be stored indefinitely without detection. The second cache was hidden in an abandoned ranch building near Los Mochis, in a location that had been carefully selected for its isolation and accessibility. The building appeared to have been vacant for years, but Marco had secretly reinforced the structure and installed a sophisticated hidden storage system beneath the floor. 3 duffel bags were buried in waterproof containers that would protect them from environmental damage while remaining invisible to any casual search. The third safe house was actually a commercial storage unit in Tijuana, rented under a false identity and secured with multiple locks and surveillance countermeasures. The location had been chosen for its proximity to international border crossings and its access to smuggling networks that could facilitate the eventual sale of the cocaine. The single duffel bag stored there represented Marco's emergency reserve, accessible if his other caches were compromised. The cover story Marco prepared for his return to duty was masterful in its simplicity and believability. When questioned about his activities during the crucial hours, he would explain that he had investigated a perimeter alarm that had turned out to be a false reading caused by storm debris. His wet clothing and muddy boots would corroborate his story about conducting outdoor inspections during the height of the storm. The beauty of Marco's plan was that it required no significant deviation from his normal behavioral patterns. He completed his shift reports with the same attention to detail he had always shown, conducted his usual equipment checks, and even helped his replacement guard understand some recent system updates. To anyone observing his behavior, Marco appeared to be exactly what he had always been, a dedicated security professional conscientiously performing his duties. At 8 a.m., Marco clocked out and left the facility, driving home through storm-damaged streets that would provide additional cover for any unusual activity. He had successfully completed the most audacious theft in cartel history, and no one had the slightest suspicion that anything was wrong. The discovery of the theft at 7:12 a.m. on September 9th sent shockwaves through the highest levels of Los Reyes Cartel leadership. The morning shift supervisor, arriving to find container 7 Alpha's biometric lock showing signs of unauthorized access, initially assumed that the readings were the result of storm-related electrical problems. However, when he opened the container to verify its contents, he discovered a nightmare that would haunt the organization for years to come. $5 million worth of the cartel's highest-grade cocaine had simply vanished. The theft had been executed with such precision that most of the container's contents remained undisturbed, creating the chilling impression that the thieves had taken only what they needed and left the rest as a demonstration of their capabilities. The missing cocaine represented more than just financial loss. It was a direct assault on the cartel's reputation and operational security. The cartel's response was swift and brutally efficient. Within 2 hours of the discovery, Los Reyes leadership had ordered a complete lockdown of all operations, while they conducted an internal investigation. Every employee with access to the facility was subjected to intense interrogation, with several lower-level workers being tortured on the mere suspicion of involvement. The interrogations were conducted by the cartel's most experienced sicarios, using methods that had been refined through years of experience in extracting information from unwilling subjects. The investigation's scope expanded rapidly as cartel leaders realized the sophistication of the theft. This wasn't the work of opportunistic criminals or disgruntled employees. It required extensive planning, detailed knowledge of security systems, and access to specialized equipment. The precision of the operation suggested involvement by someone with military or intelligence training, raising the terrifying possibility that the cartel had been infiltrated by government agents or rival organizations. Inter-cartel tensions exploded when the planted cigarette butts, casings, and fabric fragments implicated the Nueva Generación cartel. Convinced their rivals had declared war, Los Reyes sicarios launched coordinated attacks across western Mexico within 24 hours, igniting a months-long cycle of revenge and drawing law enforcement away from the theft. On encrypted radio, Los Reyes offered a $20 million bounty for the stolen cocaine, threatening anyone linked to the heist with brutal retribution. In response, Mexico's army set up checkpoints across Sinaloa, and the Attorney General created a national task force to treat the warehouse raid as a security emergency. The DEA issued a blue alert for insider threats, warning that the heist could disrupt U.S. drug interdiction efforts. Interpol circulated global notices, while agencies in Colombia, Panama, and the U.S. monitored for the missing shipment. Marco's elaborate misdirection, burned-out vehicle, falsified evidence, wasted hundreds of investigative hours, and convinced some officials that Nueva Generación was to blame long after evidence pointed elsewhere. 6 months after the heist, a single photograph surfaced on an underground forum. A rugged man with hawk-steely eyes lounging aboard a private yacht off the coast of Marseille. He wore a bespoke linen shirt, his good hand resting casually on a tumbler of single-malt whiskey. The yacht's name, El Halcon, was an unmistakable signature. Overnight, investigators across 3 continents chased the image. But by the time they traced its metadata to a French marina, the photo had vanished along with every record of the vessel's arrival. In early spring, Interpol intercepted a cryptic wire transfer, $2 million sent from a shell account in the Cayman Islands to a children's cancer charity in Monterrey. The memo line read only, "For new beginnings." Mexican intelligence analysts quietly noted that the donation amount matched the bounty Los Reyes once placed on Marco Delgado's head, and that the timing coincided with a lull in cartel violence. It was the kind of gesture only El Halcon could conceive, turning stolen blood money into a small measure of redemption. Meanwhile, Maria's health stabilized. She received a letter bearing no return address, but written in familiar, meticulous handwriting. I'm with you always. Inside was a plane ticket to Lisbon and a second note. We have a life waiting where neither cartel nor army can reach us. Maria never boarded. She tucked the note into her Bible and whispered a prayer for her husband's safety and for the soul of the man she once knew. By July, whispers placed Marco in Patagonia, overseeing a remote ecotourism lodge built around a reforestation project. Locals described him as the elusive Swiss architect who arrived on a helicopter, inspected saplings with an expert's eye, then disappeared into the woods for days without word. No one ever saw him smile, but every tree ring told the story of a man planting new roots far from the desert's blood-stained sands.